The more Mr. Oot thought about it, the more deeply frustrated he felt. Was it because his fate was tied to this six-animal star that he hadn't had chicken to eat during the 3 days of Tet for years now? It had been a long time since both his parents passed away, leaving behind a useless younger brother, and he had never experienced the taste of meat. Sometimes a fox would eat all the chickens, leaving only a handful of blood-red feathers scattered inside the coop. A few strands of bloody feathers were even cunningly dragged by the fox to the floor of Mr. Oot and his brother's bed. Sometimes a thief would sneak into the house while he was out in the field and steal the chickens. That brother of his was truly useless. All day long, he just rolled his eyes and grinned with his crooked mouth, but resolutely refused to speak. And if he could talk, maybe the foxes would be scared of human sounds and not dare to come near. Not to mention he couldn't walk either. If he could hear footsteps, maybe they wouldn't have been robbed. But they got robbed right in the daytime. But he shouldn't blame him. If you're going to blame someone, blame the sky for casting such bad luck and bringing forth an imperfect being into the world. Consider him to have limbs just as a formality when he cannot use them for eating or taking care of personal matters. Those Western-educated doctors, friends of the high-ranking officials, once mentioned his condition. They said something about brain degeneration or paralysis, but Mr. Oot didn't understand. He was born a tenant farmer. So were his parents and grandparents. How could he have the knowledge to understand the complex matters of those above and before him? After calming down and thinking for a while, Mr. Oot hurriedly went into the house, took a machete, and went to split bamboo. The land of the wealthy landowner was abundant with bamboo, but tenant farmers like him could only ask to take the core back for temporary use. The bamboo skin was split into mats or baskets to hold rice. Sometimes bamboo was woven into baskets, trays, or fashioned into fish traps. The wealthy with land could just use bamboo as a versatile commodity. But the poor like him could only ask for bamboo cores to split and weave into walls. His house walls were entirely made of bamboo mats. Where sturdy, he would temporarily place one piece. Where weak, he would use 2 or 3 pieces to block the wind, warm the house, and prevent rainstorms. With deft hands, Mr. Oot gently split a bamboo stalk into pieces. He used the tip of the machete to separate the ends into small, thin strands. Then he bent the bamboo stalk to soften it and began to shred it into many small pieces, weaving them into an unfinished mat. Once done, Mr. Oot covered a bamboo frame he had previously prepared a few days ago. Using small laths and cords, he began tying them together. By the time the sun was setting, he had finished a rectangular door with one vertical cross piece longer by about 2 hand spans. This way, he had a door to install in the house without having to go to the market to buy hinges and waste money. The long post was simply placed in a bamboo segment and firmly lodged into the ground. The top used coconut husk ropes to tie, and a revolving millstone-like door could open and close. Recently, because the house didn't have a back door, Lou the dog sneaked in and ate half a pound of his meat. His fate seemed to be disgraced and unlucky with meat. The brother-in-law from the neighboring village, knowing that he had been robbed and suffered years of livestock failure, gifted him half a pound of meat. Yet that darn dog, brazen enough to gobble up half a pound of his precious meat. But strangely enough, Lou had never dared to behave like that before. It could catch mice or monitor lizards, but it never touched any food left on the shelf. Who knows what kind of courage it swallowed to dare do such a thing? Ever since his brother bee grew up a bit, the lonely house in the secluded clearing was even more devoid of human shadows. Neighbor children didn't like coming to his house only to witness such a pathetic yet terrifying figure. And it's reasonable for them to fear Bee, because his white-green complexion was always paired with an eerie smile. His glaring white eyes stared unblinkingly at every child with an inexplicable hunger. No one knew who those eyes were looking at when the whites were too many to contain the tiny pupils that seemed to endlessly circle around. Its face looks quite peculiar too, sometimes twisted or drooping down with a long, reddened tongue, especially when it laughs with someone. The kids in the village whisper to each other, "Uncle Lute's younger brother has such a long tongue. It's so long that one wonders if it's really human." Of course, such things are murmured secretly among the young and old. They fear if Uncle Lute hears it, he would be troubled. But the more something is gossiped about, the easier it is for it to reach one's ears. Uncle Lute overheard it, but he didn't mind, because he knows their fear of Little B is justified, as he loves him dearly. Yet at times, even he is startled by it. People have their destined fate. Uncle Lute often says when he has to take care of a disabled younger brother, separated from the villagers. He has a miserable fate, and Uncle Oot has a sorrowful duty of bearing a blood tie that he can't bear to abandon. They don't have meat to eat. The main food in the house is fish from the fields. This sometimes reassures Uncle Oot. After all, there are countless fish in the fields. Just set a few dozen fishing rods hastily, and there's food to be had. But Little B at home is picky about eating. Born in a tenant farmer's house, but living as if in wealth. Eats only 3 grains of rice. Plain fish sauce doesn't satisfy him. Once, during work, after hastily braising a pot of fish, Uncle Oot left, having ladled a few fish pieces into a bowl for his younger brother. Upon returning, he found a fish wasn't fully cooked yet, still smelling fishy. And yet Little B had eaten all the fish in the bowl. Looking into his eyes, Uncle Oot was surprised. It seems like the boy enjoys eating soft foods. Normally, Uncle braises fish quite deliciously, but can't please his younger brother. He eats so little yet grows fast. The only issue is that he doesn't walk like everyone else. As he grows, he starts to smell foul, with hints of chicken and duck that linger. While he smells of poultry, no chicken or duck survives long in the house with the threat of fox packs and daily thieves. Neighbors also lament constantly losing chickens and ducks without understanding why. This Uncle Oot also noticed, because before, neighbors' chickens and ducks were found here, but less each year. Then they disappeared entirely. So is it rampant foxes or increasingly cunning, deceitful thieves? No one knows. A shared calamity. But the whispering becomes harder to hear over time. Young and old say, "There's a ghost in Uncle Oot's garden. This ghost specializes in eating raw meat, so no chicken or duck survives in that garden." Uncle Oot doesn't pay attention to idle talk. He leaves for the fields at dawn and returns at dusk every day. In the morning, he hurriedly cooks rice and divides it into 2 portions, one to bring along and one for the disabled younger brother. This way, he only has relatively leisurely evenings, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes with a few small glasses of wine. After that, he rolls into sleep, waiting for dawn. The farmer's sleep is heavy, yet the rats in the house have become problematic, acting increasingly bold. Recently, in his restless sleep, he hears them rummaging through pots and pans disturbingly. Come morning, the snakehead fish, just sun-dried for a day, is gone without a trace. What kind of rats act like demons or ghosts? They specialize in eating raw fish, never touching the dried ones. Losing things over time is painful. Many nights, Uncle Oot tried to watch to understand the rat's look. As if understanding his intent, they became silent, almost as if they didn't exist. Yet when he's too exhausted, just dozing off a bit, they begin a commotion with pots and pans. One bright, moonlit night, light flooding through the gaps of the curtain wall next to the porch made the room dimly lit. In his fitful sleep, Uncle Oot saw what seemed like a strip of red silk fluttering in the empty space of his house. That hazy strip of silk danced, appeared and disappeared, vanishing when he opened his eyes fully. It happened many times, but he still thought he was dreaming, mistaking chickens for quails. One day, when the neighboring house held a funeral meal festival, Uncle Oot was invited over. That day, he drank quite a bit and became thoroughly drunk. Just back home, he fell immediately onto the wide bed, big enough for them both. Deep in the night, Uncle Oot awakened with a tickling on one cheek. Something soft like wet silk was stroking his face. In a drowsy, drunken state, Uncle Oot thought the dog Lou was playing around, jumping onto the bed, licking him. But upon looking closely, he found it to be the same red silk strip that haunted him nightly, dancing, flowing smoothly. The red silk, 3 fingers wide, fluttered and waved like it was playing, teasing the face of a drunk. Uncle Oot wanted to grasp the silk strip, but his hands wouldn't respond. A drunk's hands rarely obey their master, not while just awoken from sleep. The noise made the silk strip vanish as if pulled into a near dark place. It seemed right from where he lay, where Littleby sat silently watching him. Uncle Oot looked at him, not understanding. The boy, why isn't he asleep at this hour, looking intensely at him like that? How come its eyes are so green? No, not green. There was a flickering flame of 2 brightly glowing marbles. Looking at him, Uncle Oot was startled, shouted loudly, "What are you doing, Bee?" In the midnight, Uncle Oot's shout must have echoed far. It startled Littleby with the sudden change in his face. His eyes lost that original eerie glow. His lips drooped as usual, but there was an unusual disappointment on his face, like a child's lost toy. Something's wrong. This young one has something different, as if he's from a dark place that people can't fathom. Uncle Oot thought and stayed awake until the rooster crowed to dawn. Today, after uprooting rice seedlings, Uncle Oot went straight to his brother in the next village. 2 brothers or cousins, close since childhood, with nothing to hide from each other. "Brother Tam, I'm so worried. Littleby at home changes every day. Don't know what he'll become. Don't know if I can manage later," he said sorrowfully to his brother. Old Man Tam looked at him full of compassion, mixed with concern. He had heard more about his nephew than his brother had, but wasn't sure how to start the conversation. "I know you're troubled because of him, but what can you do? After all, he's still your blood." He paused here, then fell silent. Uncle Oot shared strange events occurred recently with his brother. Tam listened for a while, then advised his brother, "Whatever you want to do, you must understand the whole story clearly. I've heard numerous terrifying things about the little one, but remain skeptical. Often I intend to mention it, fearing you would be saddened. It's just the 2 of us, and you always in the fields, unaware of matters at home. To understand Littleby's activities, you must secretly watch him." After saying that, the old man went inside, brought a bound chicken out, and handed it to Uncle Oot. "You look pale. Take this chicken home, cook some green bean porridge and eat. This is all I can help you with." Uncle Oot was halfway home when it started to rain. The rain was heavy. Lightning crisscrossed the horizon. The path became slippery under the blinding flash of lightning. Upon returning home, Uncle Oot quickly put the chicken in the coop, then rushed back to the field. Not careful, the seedlings will all wash away, he thought, and ran faster and faster. Just a few steps away from the field, Mr. Oot suddenly stopped. It wasn't that he was exhausted. He just didn't want to continue walking when he remembered his brother's words. "Just have to keep an eye on it. See what Littleby does whenever I'm out in the field." The back door dimly appeared in the rain and lightning. The dog, Lou, didn't run out to greet him as usual. Who knows which neighbor's dog it ran off with? The door he made to keep the foxes away from the chicken coop was only a few steps away when Mr. Oot heard the chickens squawking loudly. "Damn those wretched foxes again." Mr. Oot grabbed a stick, pushed open the door, and rushed in. The door with its creaking hinges swung open as the sight of the strange ribbon from that night appeared before him. The difference was that it was much longer and as red as blood under the lightning's glare. As soon as it heard noise, the ribbon dashed swiftly towards the front of the house, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. Mr. Oot looked into the chicken coop and saw nothing but a clump of blood-red feathers lying there. He quickly went over to the bed, where he saw Littleby's face as if he were asleep, but oddly, the corners of his mouth had some blood. It wasn't the foxes that ate the chickens. The chickens died because of that red ribbon. But what is that ribbon? Why is there blood on Little B's mouth while he's sleeping? After that night, Mr. Root began to notice many strange occurrences in the house. Farmers pulling up seedlings, planting rice, getting bitten by leeches, and bleeding was normal. Others who were bitten by leeches would have the bites dry up after a day, and by the second day, it was all gone. But the leech bite on Mr. Oot's leg didn't heal. Instead, it was moist with yellowish fluid and pus. Sometimes it lasted a whole week or a month without healing. In the end, he had no choice but to bandage it with medicine. Could it be because of that ribbon? Mr. Root quickly dispelled the thought from his mind, thinking it too bizarre. But in the end, what is it really? Thus, he concocted a plan to clarify everything. In January, the fields were dry and the grass was burning. The season for harvesting paddy was over, so people flocked to the fields to hunt rats and catch birds. Mr. Root caught many birds and brought them home to roast with a delicious aroma. Yet Littleby didn't eat. Recently, he had become noticeably thinner. Looking at him, Mr. Oot felt a pang of sorrow, for he understood the expression, blood flows, heart softens. In the afternoon, a neighbor slaughtered a pig and gave Mr. Oot a kilo of meat as a gift. He tossed the meat onto a drying rack hanging on the kitchen shelf, then hurried off to set fishing hooks in time for the evening. After walking through 3 or 4 garden rows, he suddenly remembered the red ribbon and turned back. The door with the grinding wheel hinge always creaked, so Mr. Oot put some mud on it. Because of this, opening the door made no noise. In the twilight, Mr. Oot saw the ribbon dancing in the kitchen. It looked like a creature lost in play, oblivious to the presence of a stranger. Careful, gently, step by step, Mr. Oot approached the ribbon. The January night sky shone brightly. The gathered light from the stars streamed through the roof that was full of holes, illuminating the silent kitchen. Mr. Oot's eyes were wide open, gazing at the bizarre object, the thing that haunted his dreams for countless nights. The cause of the death of chickens and ducks. What's more, he hadn't tasted meat for 5 years, all because of it. Furious, resentful, furious. All of it was due to that evil ribbon. Suddenly he froze. His body turned cold as if he had immersed himself in water for a long time. The ribbon looked like a tongue, with tiny taste buds protruding from its body. These tiny fibers trembled, undulating, scratching at the piece of meat on the drying shelf. Then it vanished towards the front of the house, only to reappear moments later. The movement was repeated with the steady smack of a child enjoying eating. Mr. Oot's mind swirled with thoughts. A human tongue? No way. A human tongue can't be that long. If judged from standing in the kitchen, the object was over 3 meters long, not including where it originated, but it was obviously a tongue, not a piece of silk. That tongue was licking the red, raw piece of meat lying there. And each time it did, the piece of meat diminished before his eyes. Mr. Oot suddenly remembered the rumors and became frightened. His tongue stiffened while the red ribbon was dancing exuberantly in front of the meat. Mr. Oot's trembling hand groped in the dark, looking for something. Anything in his hand at this moment would add courage to a man being consumed by fear. The kitchen was empty. There was nothing within reach that he could grasp. His trembling hand suddenly touched a warm place. It was the ashes from the roast fire from that afternoon. The warmth of the embers did not stop Mr. Oot from trembling. Instead, it increased his despair. He couldn't run away either, because the little boy was still in the house. Then he lunged forward to grasp the horrifying ribbon. The devil's tongue had been living off the meat in his house. The demonic tongue thrashed violently with terrifying strength. Its body was slippery and covered in slime, making it difficult to hold. Mr. Oot was shoved back into the pile of hot ashes. Regardless, he was determined not to let go. A thought flashed in his mind at that critical moment. He grabbed a handful of ashes and clenched it tighter around the crazed silk. Inside the room came the muffled moans of the boy, mingled with the chilling howls of the dog, Lou. The dog's howls were broken, trembling, and afraid. Mr. Oot paid no attention to it all, because now he had grabbed the tongue with his hands full of ashes. But it was very strong. It swayed him south, then north, and pulled him into the bedroom. The boy continued moaning, coughing, flailing his arms and legs on the bed. The starlight shone through the decaying window beside the house, illuminating the boy's face. As soon as Mr. Oot saw it, he screamed in horror. Oh my God! It was no longer his younger brother. It was a demon with a horrid, long tongue trying to wrap tightly around him. The tongue initially tried to retract. Now it extended forward, winding several times around Mr. Oot's neck. The tip of the tongue, full of rancid slime, grazed over his face. Panic-stricken by what happened, Mr. Oot grabbed the cutlass at the head of the bed and swung it forcefully. Underscore. Underscore. The sounds of gongs and drums echoed loudly in the still night. Villagers by the creek, near Mr. Oot's house, scrambled and shouted for fire extinguishing. The fierce fire in the dry season blazed high, illuminating an entire peaceful countryside. When the people arrived, Mr. Oot's house had already burned to the ground in a moment. The young men used coconut leaves to douse the flames to find the unfortunate, but found nothing except the cutlass and some broken pieces of earthenware. The people speculated vigorously, unsure if those in the house managed to escape or were burned to ashes. Long afterward, no one understood what had happened to the ill-fated siblings. Among all the speculations, there was always one person who remained silent. That was the old Mr. Tam from the neighboring village. He stayed silent not because he knew nothing, nor should he be blamed for the scarce words of an old man nearing the end of his time. Because if one day he didn't reveal the truth, then how would this terrifying story ever be told?